Hello and welcome to the Michael Mama Show. I'm your host, Michael Mamas, and we're coming to you from Mount Soma, home of the Sri Someshwara Temple in the mountains of western North Carolina. Temple Pundit and Lakshmi, his wife, were in India for a little over a month, and they're getting back here in a couple of days, so it'll be good to have them back. We, of course, always have somebody, temple needs to be taken care of, and all the mantras have to be recited and all that every day. And so we have some wonderful people here who are doing that for Punnaji while he's gone. But it'll be good to have him back. He's a dear friend, you know. All right. So before we get started with the main topic of the podcast, there are about a half a dozen little short things I like to bring up. You know, I talk about that, well, more than one, but one church in particular I'm thinking of that you drive by, that I drive by, and the Mount Soma people drive by on the way into town. And they have a bulletin board up, you know, and they say a lot of fun things, different Bible quotes and things that I always love to see the parallels between that and, you know, things in the Veda. All religions are interconnected, you know. Really, in an ideal world, I think Christians would look at Vedic literature and say, "Oh, what a beautiful expression of understanding of Christ," and Hindus would look at Christians and say, "Oh, what a beautiful expression of knowledge of Chaitanya," you know. But I guess the world's not there yet. At any rate, because it's all about the same one thing, the one thing that's a source of everything. I mean, it's all based on that, and the personified correlates to that. Okay, but at any rate, I was driving by this church, and I'm going by, just catch the quotes out of the corner of my eye, you know, but I read the quote, and it said, "Be the person your dog thinks you are." And I thought, gee, what a kind of an odd quote at church, but a beautiful quote, you know, because, you know, and being a retired veterinarian, you know, I thought about some of the clients and that I had with their pets, you know, and the association, the deep love really that pets have for their owner. And it's a beautiful thing, you know. So then, I don't know, the next day or whatever, when I drove by again, I looked at the quote again, and then I looked at it more carefully, and I realized it said, "Be the person that God thinks you are," not your dog, but your God, you know. And it gave me a chuckle, and you know, I can think people could hear what I'm saying. There are two different ways, which is probably true of most of the subjects I talk about. But that's the beauty of relationships and meaningful relationships. And I think one reason why you know, a lot of people are more comfortable with their pets or, you know, than they are with other human beings, because there's more polarization, perhaps, with people in the world. And I think the reason for that, as I was thinking about it, is, you know, people hear something somebody says and they misunderstand it or don't agree with it. Even if they do understand it, they don't agree. And we get caught up in these narratives or these perspectives or things like that. And it polarizes people from one another. Whereas with our pets, you know, we don't have that so much, you know, and it's more a feeling level. The connection is more a feeling level. And that is honored and upheld first and foremost. And so it creates a beautiful relationship. And we'll talk more about that as we get in the podcast, actually, because it does in a very interesting way that I didn't really identify or think about at first glance, but it relates to what this podcast is even about. On to the next mini point. This whole thing about DirecTV and AT&T. You know about that, Scotty, right? That
Yeah, you're talking about how they changed the lineup and stuff? Or?
Yeah. First of all, there was a conservative TV show called channel One America News. It was called, and DirecTV dropped them. Of course, DirecTV is owned, I guess, 75% or something like that by AT&T. And I remember when I saw that, I hardly ever. Again, I like to check out all the different news stations to get different perspectives, and I did have looked at it, had looked at it in the past, but wasn't a go-to station for me or anything. But nevertheless, when that happened, it was like, gosh, are they censoring One America News? And if they are, I don't agree with that. But I couldn't prove it, and who knows? Maybe contract dispute, whatever. But then just recently, they did the same thing to another conservative news station, which evidently is one of the 4 top news stations in viewership, called Newsmax. And I had watched Newsmax in the past some, again, it's not my main go-to, but boy, did that hit me the wrong way, because they are censoring the news. That is unacceptable to me. Who was it? Maybe Scotty, I can't remember, Patrick Henry or somebody said that something in the fact that I don't necessarily agree with what another person is saying, but I'll defend to the death their right to say it.
Yeah.
I feel that way. I mean, it's a Gestapo type of state when you start doing that kind of thing. So before this even got to the news, just when I noticed it, it was such a turnoff to me that I actually, on my own, independent of hearing about it anywhere else, I called DirecTV immediately and I canceled. I said, I just can't do this. I said, to me, it's despicable what the station is doing. And so I packed up all my DirecTV equipment, and right now it's in a box in the foyer of my house, ready to get shipped as soon as I get the box from them to ship it in. And I feel good about it. And then after that, it started coming out in the news all over the place that DirecTV is doing that and censoring, and they're encouraging people now to do exactly what I did, and I think it's right. Freedom of speech. I'm a huge advocate of that. And all you have to do is look at history and see when that's one of the first steps to creating a dictatorial state. And we have to draw a line. We have to do what we believe in,
Michael, did you hear the other news about like all the mainstream news channels? Like number one is actually Fox, I believe. And then their highest rated show gets 2 million views, but they only get a few 100,000 of the demographic of which everybody cares about, which is like 25 to 50 or something.
I don't understand what you mean. What's that? What do you mean?
Okay, so like if a channel like Fox, they have 2 million viewers.
Right.
What they say is the ones that they're shooting for to watch it are somewhere between 20 and 50 years old. They're shooting. That's the demographic that you want, because that's the consumers.
Right. And so what were you saying then? They're shooting for 20 to 50-year-olds, but
so out of the 2 million viewers that watch Fox, only like a few 100,000 are actually in that demographic.
No kidding.
And for CNN, it's even worse. Like they'll have a total viewership of their biggest show is like 500,000 viewers, and they only have like less than half of that are in that demographic.
And what does that tell you?
Well, that's telling everybody that people aren't getting their news from like CNN, Fox. The major demographics are going to outside small online streaming type of services,
as
they're not,
opposed to
as opposed to
major
actual major
major
channels like
broadcast networks.
CNN, Fox, whatever it is.
Mhm. It's interesting anyway.
Yeah.
All right, so that's one. Let's go on to the next point here. Oh, this is a really interesting point. Somebody's mentioned this to me, and I was like, "Yeah, that's a good one. That's right." And that is the COVID lockdown. When they locked down the whole country, the whole world, really, all over. What did they do when they did that? They pulled the rug out from uh, people's lifestyles. What they did, get up, go to work, whatever. So people's routines got completely disrupted. And what that did to a whole population, the world, is it just left a lot of people floundering. And it speaks to the importance, and they talk about the value of having a routine and things like that. Well, it wiped all of that out. And I think it went a long way to the degradation of the nation and the people in the nation. They weren't really intending it for that, I hope, but it's a very interesting point. And that too, in a way, it will relate to the main body of this podcast when we get into it. The next thing, the Chinese balloon that they flew over the United States and Communist Party, CCP, they put out a thing where they said that, and they tried to sound so politically correct. And they were saying that, this was just a weather balloon that went adrift and there should be more tolerance and love, or however they put it, between nations. And to shoot it down and all that is just so wrong. But the thing is, that's like the boy that cried wolf. If you just look at the things China has done with, infiltrating our nation with fentanyl through Mexico, and so many political moves, and we've talked about all that from time to time throughout the podcast, this and that. They've shot their credibility. They have no credibility, and their behavior has not been highfalutin. And at this point, people would be oblivious to what's self-evident if they just connect the dots. That they can't profess at this point in time to claim the high ground in that regard. And can anybody really believe that, that balloon is just a weather balloon? It's just too inconsistent with everything they've been doing.
And then they blew it up, when it got to North Carolina or somewhere, or was
the U.S. shot it down.
Right, I know, but they waited till it got all the way across.
Yeah, and they're saying, well, they didn't want to shoot it down where it might have hurt people. That's a whole other credibility thing. And, then the argument is, well, when you saw it coming, why didn't you shoot it down way back when? Instead of waiting until it got all the way across the nation.
Well, Michael, this speaks to the fact that it seems like everything now is not about issues. It's about sides,
Size? What do you mean by size?
Sides. Somebody taking sides, like politics of Democrats or Republicans or whatever.
It's all the narrative.
It's all
about what narrative you buy into. And that too is going to relate to the main body of the podcast. So, I may not draw these connections. Hopefully, though, when you listen to the rest of the podcast, you'll see, oh, yeah, that's how that applies. That's how that applies. That's why the notes are good, too, I think. It's good after you hear the podcast, really, to reread the notes at some point. I think it's good. Okay, next one. I predicted this, and it's highly predictable. The James Webb Telescope and how it shows that Big Bang can't be right because there are galaxies that are much older than the Big Bang predicted, blah, blah, blah. But when before that even came out, because we were anticipating that's what they were going to find. I have friends that are physicists. We talk, but there are scientists that have dedicated their entire careers to things like the Big Bang Theory. And so I just said that, they are going to struggle. They're not just going to lie down and say, oh, okay, well, it's been refuted. They're going to come up with things to try to keep their theory afloat, which is really not at all scientific, but, it's just very human. They invested their life into this thing, wrote books about it, everything else. And that's in fact what's happening. They're claiming different things like, well, the calibration, the precision of the measuring devices wasn't quite accurate, and so they were getting false readings. And really, the Big Bang Theory is right. And we'll see more of that. Same with the Bell theorem. Now that somebody showed that it's just classical physics, you don't need entanglement theories and quantum mechanical theories and all that to show it's just very simple high school mathematics principle of Newtonian physics. But it's just an interesting thing. And I've talked about that too, like with Darwin, and when they did a study and they showed that it happened way too fast, couldn't possibly be Darwin. There's something has to more be going on. And what I say that is that there's the Chaitanya, the Christ, the unified field, underlying basis of existence. That's the source of everything and infuses intelligence into everything that birth and maintains this whole universe. And everything's just naturally gravitates back to that. It's like sending a frequency through a sandbox. Every grain of sand in the things, over time, it starts to attune to that, and you start seeing patterns of intelligence in what initially was just a pile of mush, So what do people do with that whole computer study? Because it doesn't support their Darwin's theory in the simplistic sense, they just ignore it. They cling to their notion. Next point. UFOs. Step one is to just acknowledge we are not alone. I mean, it's a huge universe. Carl Sagan, even people like that, said, there's intelligent life out there, all kinds of intelligent life out there. Then the question becomes whether or not they visited planet Earth. That's another subject. I have my opinion on it. But I think step one for people is just to come to grips with the reality that, hey, there are other arenas of intelligent life out there. It just doesn't make sense that we're the only one. And I mean, that's been a mentality, way back when everybody thought that everything revolved around the earth. And it's just a natural human tendency to, think you're the center of the universe, I guess. But we got to get over it, Oh, and then some people think, well, if there's intelligent life outside of Earth, that'll undermine Christianity, undermine religion. No, it won't. It'll expand our appreciation of just, for example, in Christianity, what the Christ is, how all pervasive it is, how much is held and embraced by the notion of the Christ, or in the Vedic tradition, the Chaitanya, and the multiple facets of that exquisite diamond that it is. It's no refutation of religion. It's a greater appreciation of its nature. Okay. All right. The last thing, and Scotty just sent me a couple other videos on this sort of thing, but the pole shift, and they're talking about the pole shift. I think it's pretty well documented, and based on all the studies you sent me, Scotty, it's clearly well scientifically documented that pole shifts happen. Isn't that right, Scott?
Yeah, I mean, from everything that I'm seeing, it's like there's evidence and sure.
Geological evidence, everything else.
Right.
Pole shift, it happens, and the pole's always moving a little bit, but when it shifts, it can move dramatically.
They even said that there's a place in Oregon that I guess the last time it happened, there was some kind of volcanic eruption happening, that if you go to this area, the 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 volcanic rock or whatever kind of almost is like taking a picture of the angle of the pole at that time. So in other words, when it shifted, it's
Oh.
going and then it solidifies.
So it
And
solidified in a manner that was consistent with when the pole was in a different location than it is now.
exactly. And so you
How
go
about
there
that?
and then your compass or whatever goes wonky to that same,
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah, because all the electromagnetics of that entire lava formation is supporting the different pole.
Yeah, and it's in Oregon.
That's, that's in Oregon.
Yeah,
Isn't
they're
that?
saying it's
That's
in Oregon.
really interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah. So anyway,
yeah.
um, we've been talking about the phase transition, and you know, and you know, I say things like Lord Krishna predicted that 5,000 years ago. If you hear that in one level, it's just so superficial and oh hocus pocus. But if you understand the structure of the Veda and what Lord Krishna means, and, and certainly there's a personified correlate, but even in a deeper sense, it's an operator within the structure of the unified field. It's an operator within the structure of the underlying basis of existence. Uh, and from that perspective, there's a predictive element, just like the sun rises and the sun sets, and the moon's full, and then no new moon, and then back and forth. And there are cycles like that, and that Krishna value, if you will, um, is one of many different modalities within that structure that monitor those cycles and that give expression to them. And so, according to that Vedic literature, then that value predicted that at this time is the phase transition time into a golden age, a wiping clean, if you will. And isn't that interesting that that time now seems to correlate with what physicists are saying, scientists are saying, geologists are saying, that there's a pole shift that's in the process of happening. Now, what it also says in Vedic literature is that it doesn't need to be an Armageddon, and I don't believe it's going to be. It's going to be. It could be seamlessly gentle if done properly, but the chaos then that we're seeing now, because again, it's a global consciousness. It's again, it's the fishbowl, and the quality of the clarity of the water in the fishbowl determines everything. How seamless that transition will be, how life supporting it will be, how the weather will be, how people's psyches will function, all of that. And so it's just interesting. This whole pole shift thing now is it seems to be one more indicator that what we're talking about is correct. The golden age is coming. We are in a phase transition. And I mean, I don't know about all of you, but to me, you just look out there and not just in the news and everything, but I mean, a lot of people are really freaking out, and behavior just seems really nutty. I mean, yeah, we see it on the news and stuff, but even people that you meet or people that you interact with, it's like, wow, that's crazy. So anyway, it's the world we live in, and things are moving in the right direction. That's the really, really good news. Okay. Um, so now, what does all that have to do with chambers of mind and the importance of good parenting? I had a dream the other night, and it was an interesting dream. Our dreams are kind of like storybook, for lack of a better word, correlations to our psychodynamic makeup, how we function in our consciousness and what's there in our consciousness. And so in that sense, our consciousness, our world, it's like a big house, big chamber with many rooms, a big house with many chambers, if you will. And each of these different rooms is different. And we all have many different facets to our psyche, many different rooms to the chamber of our awareness, like that. And so anyway, in my dream, I was in my house and it was all very good and stuff. And I walked and I turned the corner and went into one room. And in that room, I saw somebody that wasn't doing so well. And I realized at that time that it's a person that I care about, and I saw that their mindset, just wasn't healthy. But, in the dream, it was, you could just see, the darkness around them sitting on the floor in that room when I turned the corner and kind of hunched over and not good. There was a woman that I heard about when I was living in Montana at the time. And I heard about this lady. She's hours away, but she was living in Montana. And she was supposed to be this incredibly wise, person and insightful. I don't know. But I got curious. And so I went to go see her. And they claimed that, they talk about auras, auras. I do whole lectures on auras and what they are and what they're not, and kind of the new age kind of foolishness, if I may say it that way, around the auras and the woo-woo about it. But there's a reality to it. It's the vibe, the feeling you get around a person. Some people are very clear. Some people are pretty clouded, But so in that sense, we all feel auras. It's not some new age thing. It's just natural life. We just don't usually use that word, Vibe might be a better word, a more commonplace word. But at any rate, this woman was said to see people's auras, 100 feet away. And I just remember I went and talked with her and I could tell what she was doing, and that is, and we can all do this. It's not a big deal, but that the first thing to do is to get comfortable with the fact that there's a vibe there. There's a feeling there. You can feel it. And then what you can do, and you could say look, and yeah, there's a look to it, but it has more to do with just a perception of the quality and the structure, if you will, of that house with the many rooms. And if you want, you could relate that to, okay, I see it over here, I remember she told me that she saw in my aura 100 feet out Lord Rama, Anyway, and I never talked to her about the Vedic anything. I didn't even know her. But at any rate, I think we do well to realize that we have these different facets to our awareness, these different qualities to our awareness. And then we can work with them, because otherwise we're functioning more or less in denial of them and in denial of the magnitude of the effect it has upon our own consciousness, And that's why I talked in the announcement for this podcast, you need to protect your mind. And so the importance of good parenting, and how does that relate? It relates to all these points that we were talking about before that we said, and I'll leave it to you to connect them yourself to what we're talking about here. But we allow our awareness to be exposed to too many unhealthy things that we don't necessarily even think of them as unhealthy. And there's a particular age, and it happens, throughout life, but there's a particular age, I think, when people are predisposed to that. Teenage, early 20s, we're looking at the world even more so than we did at younger age. We're looking at the world in a way that is like individuating, separating in a sense from the smaller world we lived in as children, which was by and large, what we experienced in the home. And so it becomes a time then, and in a way it's kind of a naive time, though concurrently with that, it's an expansive time of letting in these different worldviews, these different perspectives, It's a time of experimentation, which is why I think a lot of times it's teens and people in that age who start dabbling in, drugs, and the whole fentanyl crisis is just anyway. Um, but so it speaks, and this is a whole book really, and I'll let you fill in the details with, well, he didn't say this, he didn't say that. I'm not going to say it all, but you can put it together for yourself. But what's the role of good parenting then in that arena? There was a guy, young guy, and he was working here at Mount Soma for us, doing some landscaping and that, grass cutting really. And oh, he was a young kid, and he was smoking and chewing tobacco. And I said, chewing tobacco and, smoking cigarettes and all that. I said, it's not really good for you. I said, why are you taking that up? He said, because my last name is, I won't say what his last name was, but the point is, it was really interesting because I had two different feelings about that. One thing is there's a cultural integrity. There's an affinity for the lifestyle of this family and his home. And I think that's a good thing, But at the same time, the tendencies of that world to smoke and chew tobacco and all that, it's not healthy. And so therein lies the challenge of good parenting. Because if the parents' world is unhealthy, then it imposes that on the kids. But at the same time, if the kids are given no healthy foundation, no healthy world from which they came, then they're even more predisposed to taking on a myriad of different, and in many cases, crazy and unhealthy things that they're exposed to. And so, there's a challenge for the parent there, because the parent needs to be open to growth, but concurrently, they have to provide the children with a stable and healthy home, a stable and healthy foundation. And so that's a tough one, because how do you see out past and beyond the world in which you've been indoctrinated as a parent? But if you don't, and if you have unhealthy habits or unhealthy ways, and at some point when the kids grow up, they're either going to take on those unhealthy ways, or they're going to reject the family because they see those unhealthy ways, in which case they're throwing out the baby with the bathwater. And I must say that one thing I see, and I've really respected quite a bit, is, at Mount Soma, we have a number of Indian communities that come and they visit their friends and relatives here and like that. And there's a certain integrity in the Indian community. By and large, the family unit is a very healthy and strong thing. It's a very protected thing. And it's a beautiful thing. The affinities within families are so good. And then every so often I see a kid that came with the family who, and I get it. If you're growing up in the United States and you look and, well, my parents are into this whole thing, and there's this one god with an elephant head and this and that. And it's all so weird. And so they start to reject that. And once that happens, they're kind of gone. There was a guy here once who was talking about where he sent his kids to school, and then he pulled them out of that school and sent them to a different school. And I said, oh, really, why? And he didn't want to answer me, and he didn't answer me, and I wish he did, because what he was saying was that the cultural climate in that school he felt was unhealthy for his kids. I know that's what he was thinking. He didn't say it. I only discovered it later. But we need to uphold the cultural integrity that is there within our home, and we need to really provide that for our kids. And at the same time, we need to be wise about it, and we need to not be narrow about it and impose any unhealthy habits that we have. It's a difficult and challenging task, but I think it's important to become aware of the importance of doing so. On the one hand, the importance of the integrity and the tradition and providing that to the kids. And on the other hand, seeing beyond, our own limitations, which is not so easy. But it's not a whitewashing. It's not like, oh yeah, this is good and that's good and that's good. It's like, and I use the analogy with an automobile. You can't take the carburetor out of a Ford F-150 truck and stick it in a Porsche. It won't work. Like that, you can't make your world, your family unit, a hodgepodge of different cultures all glued together. You can honor them, you can study them, and that's all good, and learn from them, and all of that is good. But the thing is, there's a certain cultural tone. It's a culture. We culture our lives. Our lives are cultured, like a fine wine, if that's an okay analogy. But taking a bunch of different vats of wine and dumping them all in the same crock pot and thinking you're going to come up with a good wine, it's just not the way it works. And that's the same with the integrity, the cultural integrity of our own home and how we raise our kids. Is that all making sense, Scotty?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, and so then we get into this whole thing about protecting. See, that's about protecting our mind, but it goes a lot further than that. There are these, when I was in India, there was a guy there and he invited me to go to Tibet with him because he said there's some Naga Babas up there. Naga Babas are like naked sadhus. They're, into their own spiritual trip. And they're up in the freezing Tibet and they just walk around without any clothes. They have these different techniques and stuff, and they do all these different ceremonies. One thing they'll do with their ceremonies is they'll connect through their ceremonies with different species, like ants, for example, or bees, or dogs, or any number of them. And through that, it'll create like a matrix that permeates the world. And so then by modulating that consciousness, if you will, it has an effect on the whole planet, and it can be directed. That's all left-handed tantra. And then you get into the arena of hexes and curses and the technology of that. Now in the West, we're like, that's all hocus pocus, or it's, black magic or witchcraft or whatever. And the thing is, it can be developed to a highly sophisticated science, and that then you get into the whole thing of, in extreme cases, demons and demonic possession, and and people, people in India, by and large, they're a lot more, if I may say so, mature in their relationship with it because they've seen so much of that. Like I've said, probably in previous podcasts, in India, there's another Indian guru on every street corner pushing their wares. And a lot of it is all left-handed tantra to manipulate people. And Westerners commonly, get sucked into that a lot more easily than the Easterners because the Easterners have seen it. Yeah, certainly in India. Now, I'm being a little simplistic, admittedly, because in Tibet, it's more popular and common. In Vietnam, there's a lot of ancestor worship that went overboard and things like that. And so it permeates everywhere, all over the world. But to me, at least based on the people I've been exposed to, there's a more mature relationship with that and a greater demographic of the nation than perhaps we see in other parts of the world, And so it all goes back to, just a healthy home and a healthy value system. And that's what protects us, if you will, protects our minds more than anything. That's the root of health, and the healthier that is, the healthier your own mentality is, the less predisposed you are to getting sucked into those things. And I have seen, I'm telling you, people employ these left-handed tantra techniques, and they can be powerful. And well, it's been said, a lot of these guys in India who are into these left-handed tantra stuff, nobody pay much mind in India because people are onto it, but they come to the United States and they get big followings of these Americans, and it happens in other countries too, that don't have the spiritual maturity to see beyond that, and they get sucked right into it. And that's the stuff that cults are made of. But the whole thing is a continuum. It doesn't have to look like a Jim Jones cult where everybody's taking LSD and dying, whatever it is they did. But there are degrees of magnitude to that. So it comes back to protecting your mind. We don't want to be too narrow and too limited and too closed-minded, too indoctrinated into a narrative. We don't want to be too predisposed into jumping onto this narrative and that narrative, especially in this world with the internet and all the TV channels and that they're all pushing their own narratives and really spinning people's minds into crazy worlds, and so is there such a thing as demonic possession? Well, of course there is, and it can be developed to a very sophisticated science where they'll actually do things, energetic things, where they can manipulate the mind, pry open the chakras. And, that's a very tempting thing too, because if somebody goes there and rips open another person's third eye, and that's just the Vedic way, or one way of saying it. In the Western world, what would they call it? Mind manipulation or something. But in the Vedic, in the Hindu, like that, they would say, rip open their third eye. And then all this light starts pouring in. Why? Because, see, there are filters on their chakras. Just like there's protective mechanisms in the awareness, there are filters on their chakras. And if you rip those filters off, all of a sudden this light flows in. And what do you think? Oh, I see the light. And it's just like I was told, everything's glowing golden and blah, blah, blah. And if there's no discernment there, you decide, these people, they decide they're enlightened and they're off and running, and it's a mess, Am I making sense, Scotty? I mean, it's all kind of, these things these things are things for you to think about, and you will hear things I say and I didn't say it quite right, or it hit you wrong. And, because these are delicate terrains we're talking about in these podcasts. And so I'm asking you to be discerning and not to, project on me. I know I was talking about identity once, and we were talking about identity with a indoctrination, and if somebody heard that I said that and said, well, I believe in my identity. I'm, this, and I identified with my family and my loved ones. Well, that's not what I meant by identity. I was using the word in a different way. And so like that, when you hear these podcasts, please, these are just invitations to explore an arena. And I leave it to you to do that based on your own level of wisdom and insight. But don't take a one-liner or something I say and misinterpret it, because communication is a huge challenge, but work with it on your own, because there is truth to everything. But it's up to us to find it within ourselves, And the other thing I do here, there's I heard that, CEOs and big heads of big companies and stuff, and people with a lot of responsibility, they tend not to read books. They would prefer somebody else to read the book, and in 2 or 3 sentences tell them then what the book was about. And then they put it together within their own awareness from there. Well, in a way, that's, again, what we're doing with this podcast. Is all these different subjects we talk about, they're books. But I'm not going to write a book with all the details. You can put that together for yourself. I'm going to give you 2 or 3 sentences that hopefully you won't misunderstand, or that hopefully I didn't say in a way that misled. But then you sort it out in your own mind. I'm giving you the 2 or 3 sentences that talk about this book and that book and this book and that book. Censorship, COVID lockdown, CCP balloon, how to protect your mind, yada, yada. And then sort them out for yourselves. Everybody would like to have somebody, I think, that just tells them what a book is about so they don't have to read the whole thing. And we're trying to do that here, So, Scotty, if there's nothing else that you'd like to add, I think that does it for this week.
No, I think we got it.
Okay, everybody, thanks for listening. I appreciate it very much, you tuning in. And we're getting a larger and larger audience from all over the world. We have a lot of listeners now from all over Europe, Germany, France. We have listeners from Australia, New Zealand. And I appreciate you all tuning in. And if you have any comments, I'd love to hear them. Okay, thanks a lot. We'll talk with you again next week.